Good morning, everybody. So Rupert Lowe has launched his new party, Restore Britain, and the US military are moving into strike positions around Iran. Listen, while we get onto this, I just want you to imagine this right now. And this could actually be one of those immediate triggers that I was talking about yesterday in the on the live stream. So can you imagine where you would be if this happens? And I'm talking about US military strikes into Iran. So yesterday, we was talking about if you live in a big city in the United Kingdom, and I gave certain triggers, and I said, look, if these things happen, you're kind of going to want to get out of the big city. Well, do you know what? I'm going to say this is another potential trigger, right? Because if the United States start conducting airstrikes into Iran in the Middle East, then I would say big cities that have a diverse population are going to become agitated. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing this fake divergence between the United States and the United Kingdom. That's what's happening right now. That has to happen. So imagine where you would be right now. Wherever you live in the United Kingdom, imagine those airstrikes going right now. What's going to be the fallout in your local town, city, wherever? We already saw yesterday, and I shared the video yesterday, these guys saying they are, they're allied to Islam, and the only true Islam is ISIS. And these people, it's not going to be very hard for the Iranian sleeper cells to activate. Sorry, they're already in the United Kingdom. We know this, right? We know there are lots of sleeper cells in the United. Well, I don't know this. I've been told because I've watched mainstream media. I've got no access to the intelligence. What I'm saying is, from mainstream media and reports that we've seen, we've been told that there are lots of Iranian sleeper cells operating in the United Kingdom. So tonight, this morning, actually, as the chessboard of the Middle East just got a little bit bigger, a lot more dangerous, the United States is moving the world's largest aircraft carrier straight into the heart of the storm. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the biggest warship humanity has ever built. I didn't realize how big this thing was, guys. I mean, this is like a floating country. So it's literally a steel city of, bombs and bullets, capable of launching more than 75 aircraft, is leaving the calm waters of the Caribbean right now and is coming in the coming days. She'll be across the Atlantic Ocean and she will be through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Persian Gulf, allegedly. She'll link up with the USS Abraham Lincoln strike group that's already there. 2 supercarriers full of strike capability, lots of airplanes, lots of helicopters, lots of special forces. These will be accompanied by Tomahawk missiles, submarines with whatever they've got on them. There'll be drones, there'll be all sorts of stuff. This isn't a routine rotation. This is an absolute, I don't even think this is an escalation. I think this is moving your pieces to the inevitable checkmate. President Donald Trump made it very clear this week. He warned Iran have to make a deal or it's going to be very traumatic, he said. To reporters, calm as you please, but the message lands like thunderclaps, thunderbolts. No deal on the nuclear program, no curbs on ballistic missiles, then brace yourselves. And you've got to understand from the Iranian regime as well. You've got to understand, excuse me. You've got to understand the Iranian regime. They're not going to come to this. They are under the belief, and rightly or wrongly so. The Iranians are under the belief that if they do not develop nuclear weapons, then they are definitely going to get taken over. Just days ago, indirect talks flickered in Oman, quiet channels immediately, intermediaries trying to thread the needle. Trump believes they can still succeed. I do not. He said publicly, I think they'll be successful. They will not. But he also says if we don't make a deal and if we don't make a deal, we will need it. And it's the Gerald R. Ford, the Hammer, that's on its way there. Remember, that carrier wasn't supposed to be there. She left Norfolk back in June 2025 to what was billed as a European deployment. Then came the redirect to the Caribbean. I've started to say Caribbean instead of Caribbean. Is it Caribbean or Caribbean? Caribbean? I don't know. Which was, part of the pressure on Venezuela, the oil cartels, the Maduro fallout. 8 months at sea already. The crew's been told no home port anytime soon. Late April, maybe May. Navy brass have warned about maintenance fatigue and the strain on the ship and the sailors. But orders are orders. The Atlantic crossing begins. These things are built to last, guys, all right? These things don't, it is out on the news that, they're complaining about maintenance. These things, they are built with so much redundancy. The only reason they need to come to shore, realistically, is for food and water. Food. Because then, I'm pretty sure it's nuclear powered, so it doesn't need to come back for fuel. The only real reason it needs to come back is for food. And you can get most of that shipped in by air. Donald Trump's not mincing his words anymore. He told troops at Fort Bragg, regime change in Iran would be the best outcome that could happen. He talks about fear as a motivator. Sometimes you have to have fear. He said, that's the only thing that will really get this situation taken care of. And he's right. He's absolutely right. If you tell people, if you go to someone and say, listen, we're going to come to a negotiation, but if we don't come to a deal, then, we don't, I'm just going to go home. If you go to someone and say, listen, I want to come to the negotiating table. If we can't come to a deal, I'm going to send in tomahawks and we're going to blow we're just going to destroy your country. Kind of gives a new sense of urgency, right? And when you're dealing these diplomatic circles, this is what happens. Politicians are terrible people to get things done. Terrible. They're the worst, actually. They're the worst people to get things done. And I am going to be coming on to Rupert Lowe's new party later in a second when I finish this. So this is maximum pressure round 2. Sanctions are biting. Assets are surging. Carriers are now doubling up. Remember, it's not just an aircraft carrier. It's the ships that, accompany that and potentially, whatever they've got under the water as well. This is the first such presence in years, and obviously Iran's seen this as a threat, and they're absolutely right. It's a prelude to something worse. They've called things like this an act of war. However, we really are one miscalculation away now from something going really, really wrong really quickly. The door to diplomacy does seem to be open, but with the Gerald R. Ford on its way to the Middle East, I think that is closing very soon. The Armada's growing in the Persian Gulf, like I said it would. And that date of March 2026 does look more and more likely by the day. And I just want to, before I get onto the chat, I want to just imagine if all this kicks off, right? In the Middle East, the United States kick off in the Middle East. Maybe it's the United States that are going to kick off first in the Middle East, and then they're going to say, listen, we're already committed to the Middle East now. We can't help you guys in Europe. Russia, do as you will. Maybe that's going to be the direction of travel. Just imagine where you're going to be. Imagine what the local, what the population and the demographic in the United Kingdom are going to do. We already know that, they're sleeper cells in the UK. They're going to be out banging their drums. Bum, 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 bum. There's going to be riots. There's going to be protests. There's going to be counter-protests. It's going to be it's chaos. Absolute chaos in the United Kingdom right now. However, Rupert Lowe has now launched his new party, Restore Britain. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Right, let me jump up and get some chat. Good morning. Yarigatsu is saying, logistically, if you can live in a big city in the UK, you are either... Yeah, I agree. Very few sensible people live in the city. In fact, I don't know anybody who live... Well, I know there are lots of people who live in the cities. Blue skies. Yeah, we got blue skies, guys. We have actually got blue skies in the United Kingdom today. I think this is the first... I think this is the first time we've had blue sky for like... well, it seems like before Christmas. Donna is saying, Omani foreign minister expected to attend US-Iran talks on Tuesday in Geneva. I don't think any of these talks have got any hope of becoming fruitful, guys. You've got to understand the sticking points here is the United States don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. Now, this was signed under the Biden administration. And the Iranians say we're having nuclear weapons. So that's literally where you are now. Neither of, like, the United States are not going to say, all right, then you can have nuclear weapons. And the Iranians are not going to say, right, okay, then we're not going to have nuclear weapons. It's just not going to happen. You know, there's no such thing like, it's just not going to happen. It's ridiculous. Right, I'm just, Silly is saying, don't worry. We will get the hit for everyone again. Just look after your Jews, please. Silly, listen, like right now in the United Kingdom, I think everybody's just in survival mode. Literally, people are just in survival mode in the United Kingdom right now. You don't leave. Like, I don't go out at night. If it's dark outside, I don't go out. Milo is saying, you saw what the Arabs did with 2 planes. Imagine... Imagine if they had a nuclear boom boom. Yeah, you can imagine, right? Right. So, listen, ladies and gentlemen, Rupert Lowe started his Restore Britain party last night. And there was one thing that he said in his opening speech. And I just thought, thank God, right? What he said is, and it's absolutely true, what he said is, to restore Britain, it's going to be painful. And for me, that was a breath of fresh air. That was an absolute breath of fresh air. Nobody, like, if you think you can go through life without, without suffering at some point, you're deluded. And what's happened is, I don't know how successful he'll be. I hope he's successful, obviously. We've had this situation where we've had consecutive government after government say, we will make everything all right. We will make everything better. We will not raise them. We will do all good stuff to you. And they're just lying. And like, you've got to break an egg to make an omelette, right? You can't make omelettes without breaking it. Well, you can buy that stuff in like in a tub, but at some point those eggs have been broken, right? So, to restore Britain, it's going to be hard work. It's going to be hard work and it's going to be painful. I'm not sure it can ever be done at this point. However, right, let's just share the video. Let's just share his opening video. It's quite a long video. I'm not going to share it all. I've not got it up. Give me a second. Sorry, guys. My mistake. Right, this is a 7-minute video. I'm not going to share it all. I'm just going to share the first like couple of minutes or something, because I think he gets the best. I'm just going to share the first couple of minutes. So if you're joining, guys, this is Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain video. I'm not going to share it all because it's like 7 minutes long. I'm just going to share the first bit, the first couple of minutes.
I have chosen to speak to you today from the farm. because places like this represent what proper Britain is about. Hard work, responsibility, effort, duty, stewardship. This is the England I know, and this is the England that I love.
When you come back from, when you come back to England from another, well, when you come back to the United Kingdom from another country, like you might have spent, I don't know, 6 months in wherever, somewhere Stan or Iraq or somewhere else. The first thing you notice is how unbelievably beautiful the countryside is. Unbelievably beautiful.
On a farm, you don't think in election cycles or headlines or polling. You think in seasons. You think in generations, in what you leave behind to those who come after you. And
that's what we everybody should be thinking that. We shouldn't be we should be thinking about what we leave behind for those behind us. Everybody. Literally, there is no truer statement than that. Everybody should, like, even you now watching in your, wherever you are, you should be thinking, right, what do I leave behind for those that come after me, for my children, for my grandchildren, for their children? Where's the historic, where's the generational wealth? Generational wealth needs to be built. And that's how you become strong, right?
And that's why here on the farm, I am now launching Restore Britain as a national political party. I'm now going to dedicate my life to finding, organising, funding, and providing hundreds of qualified candidates to present to the British people at the next general election. This process has already started, with invitations being issued to patriots in aligned political parties, Reform, the Conservatives, the SDP, Advance, and more. In local politics, we will work in partnership with localised political parties, such as Great Yarmouth First, that have the best interests of their residents at heart, combining our forces at the next general election. The men and women standing for Restore in that election will not be politicians. I promise you that. They will not be failed ministers. They will not be tainted by failures of the past. They will be from business, from the military, from science, from medicine, from education, from industry, representing real communities up and down the country.
So I'm going to leave it there. I might share some more of that later. When I'm doing these videos, I'm doing these from the standpoint of back in whenever it was, I was a candidate for Reform UK. I was standing as, as an MP for Reform UK, and I just tapped out of it. I literally just tapped out. I didn't want to be part of it, guys. I did not want to be part of Reform. Now, that's before Nigel was in, before Nigel's started to be there. And I've, but when I used to go to these meetings, right? When you go to these meetings and you meet all these other people, and I was taught, I struggle to find common ground with lots of people. But when I was talking to these people, I just thought, wow, these people, some of them, not all of them, obviously, some of these people are absolute snakes, absolute snakes. And you can just tell straight away. And I didn't want to be associated with a lot of them. James is saying a massive satellite is called Bluebird 6. No, sorry, not James is saying massive satellite is called Bluebird 6. More to be launched. Even scientists say it will muddy astronomy. We won't know what's real. What is a satellite or an asteroid? They will appear the same. I don't know what that means. What are we talking about, guys? I have no idea what we're talking about. Donna is saying Keir Starmer will accuse parties like Reform UK and the Greens of being soft on Russia and weak on NATO, and more likely to leave the nation divided and defeated. I mean, I don't think Keir Starmer's been. Hang on, how do I say this? I think Keir Starmer's been quite hard on some Ukrainians, right? What we're seeing is this divide, right? Where the United Kingdom are being forced into this conflict in the Middle East. Sorry, in Ukraine. Ultimately, this this all comes down to logistics. If the United States were to get involved in the conflict in Ukraine, they would have to, get all their stuff here, right? And they'd have to do that by ship, by sea. There's no other way around that. They'd have to do it by sea, probably. Where would they do it? They would have to do it like maybe in France. So they'd have to ship all their stuff to France. Maybe Poland. No, Poland, of course. Yeah, Poland. They'd have to ship all their stuff to Poland. And then from Poland, they would then have to truck that into Ukraine. So that's a massive logistical feat. And then if there's going to be a war in the Middle East as well, it makes no sense because Britain, the rest of NATO, we don't have that logistical capability to move stuff by sea. We just don't have it. We really don't have it. So it makes sense that the United States goes into the Middle East unilaterally with Israel and using Israel as a landing pad and for air support and the RAF Akteri. Headlines like this just show the direction of travel. And look, there's going to be no election until 2029. So can you imagine what the situation of the United Kingdom is going to be like in 2029? It's going to be quite unbelievable. It is. It's going to be fantastic. Right. I get this quite a lot. So Milo is saying, don't worry about Russia. Ukraine is breaking their lines. That's not happening, guys. What's happening right now is the Russians are moving forwards every day. Literally every day, the Russians are moving forwards. The Ukrainians don't have the ability to stop them. Yes, they have their little quadcopter drones and everybody's talking about them. It's not slowing anything down, guys. It's harassing at best. These things are harassing at best. So let me just give me a second. Right, so I'm going to share this war map with you. I've not shared this for a while, but people, if the situation in Ukraine is the Russians are moving forwards, right? The Russians are taking ground every day. Every day that's happening, right? So obviously, map of Ukraine, you've got Kiev, you've got Kremenchuk, you've got Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Odessa. Red area is occupied Ukrainian land, basically. So I'm just going to zoom in. You've got Pokrovsk here, which is the latest town to fall. So this was the situation on the ground on the 13th of last month. So literally a month ago. I'm just going to fast forward now to where we are today. And although it's not much, oh, I missed it. Although it's not much, look at the ground that the Russians are taking. Every day, it's small moves forwards. Every day, literally every day, the Russians are taking more ground forwards. And it only seems like a little bit of ground in these little places. But when you multiply that on the whole front line, it adds up. Now, if the Russians were to do a huge surge forwards, if the Russians were to do a huge surge forwards, which I do think is coming, for example, from here to here, like 140 kilometers, that would be big news, that may provoke a response from the West. So little and often, nobody pays attention to it. Now, where are we? Where's Pokrovsk? Am I in the wrong place? Where am I looking? Pokrov's there. I'm totally in the wrong place. Where am I? Oh, there we are. So if you guys can remember this town here, Pokroves, this town. So this town, Pokroves, I can remember, we can all remember when the Russians were moving towards it. They came from the north, they came from the south in the pincer, and Zelensky moved in thousands of troops to secure it. They said, no, Pokrovs is not going to fall. We're going to defend it. Pokrovs is still under Ukrainian control. I got a word from my friend who had literally just left Pokrovs. I said, mate, what's happening in Pokrovs? He said, oh, Sean, Pokrovs has gone, mate. There's not a chance they can hold on to that. Turns out, Pokrovs has gone. And nobody talks about it now. Nobody talks about it. Everybody just pretends that didn't happen. Same thing with, where are we? We've got a couple more towns here. We've got two more towns down here somewhere. You've got Valyeka Novosilka. I can't find it. You've got two more towns down here. There we are. Look. So we've got this town here, exactly the same. This town here. Let me do blue. Valyeka Novosilka, exactly the same. I can remember when the Russians came in. They came from the north and they came from the south, and then they closed it up. Same with this town here, Volodya. I can remember when that was on the news. The Ukrainians were holding on. They were holding on for the last assault. The Russians came from the north, came from the south, then they closed it up. It's this constant slog forwards. The Russians are not losing, guys. The Russians are not losing this conflict in Ukraine. Depends what you mean by losing. If you consider losing the conflict, that you're taking more ground every day and you're not being pushed back, then if you think that if that's losing, then yes, the Russians are losing. If you consider winning as you're taking more ground every day and you're not being pushed back, then in that definition, the Russians are winning. And they may change the definition of winning. NATO Keir Starmer may have changed the definition of winning. Footlong is saying, what do you think about Israel vaporized? I have no idea. That's the first time hearing about it. What do you think about Israel vaporizing 3,000 Palestinian people with a hydrogen bomb? That's the first I've heard of that, mate. I wouldn't be able to comment. That's literally the first I've heard about it. Can you share that as a link and I'll have a look at it? But I've not heard about that, mate. I don't know. Band again is saying, only I look at two things, policies and changes of winning. Advance, restore, UKIP, reform are 95% the same, but reform are established nationwide now, leading the polls and bookies' favourites. Yeah, this is the thing, right? This is the thing with this Restore Britain. Will they be able to gain enough traction by 29? Debatable says, no one ever takes Russia, and if the West try, then the whole of Russia will have just cause. They're not just full hog in Ukraine. So what people don't understand is, I think people are starting to understand this now. When you compare military side by side, you compare a conscript, right, with compare a conscript with a trained NATO soldier, right? So Russian conscript, trained NATO soldier. You've got your trained NATO soldier, right? It's probably done, to be a private, grade 1 private or whatever, whatever they're called. He's had to do at least the 6 months basic training, right? Where you go and you learn basic training, then you learn a trade, then you get, so you maybe 6 months training, right? When you look at conscripts, they've got like no training. They're just like given a rifle and said, right, there you go. Now, of those two, which one do you think's the better soldier? Of course, you know, it's the NATO soldier, right? Because he's got all the training, he's got all the equipment. Which one do you think's going to be easier to reproduce? Which one do you think is going to be easier to replace? Well, of course, it's the conscript, right? So now if we look at long wars of attrition, where you have, you know, mass casualties and you're taking lots of casualties, then the odds start to stack up to the country that can replace their manpower the quickest. So yes, you've got your NATO troops that are fantastically armed and they've got all the expensive kit and equipment. But ultimately, that's very difficult to replace. And once you start losing manpower at that level, you know, it's difficult to replace. But the Russians can replace them very quick. Band again is saying, Churchill said, don't chuck out the good in search of the perfect. There is no perfect. I don't know what that's in reference to, guys. I don't know what that's in reference to. We dig up graves because the hostages were there and we don't leave any. Okay, I don't know what that's in reference to. Debatable Lands is saying, no one knows how many died. Had Russia even had real soldiers yet? The Russians don't like the West. They will fight harder against us. So this conflict in Ukraine, where this is going to develop into is land pirates. I've talked about land pirates before. I've talked about it lots. We are going to have a scenario where we have. Let me get the map. Let me just pull this map back up. It doesn't matter where this comes from, right? But let's just say that somewhere here, let's just say Brest, right, or Brest. So this town here. So this is on the I don't know which side you guys are looking at. On the west, on the east, it's Belarus. On the west, it's Poland. So let me just write here. Let's write. Okay, so we've got Poland on this side. Well, you guys can see that's Poland, right? So this is the border, roughly, right? Let's say Belarus here. I'll just put Bell, right? I'm not used to writing with my cursor, right? So, and then we've got Belarus here, and then we've got Poland here. Okay, so what I talk about when I talk about land pirates is, for example, when things escalate to a sufficient level, potentially when the United States are committed in the Middle East, which could be any day now, I think we're going to have a scenario where this town here, it might not come from this town, guys. This is just for an example, right? This town here, Brest, it's a huge railport. It's got a huge railway station, right? Because in the days of the Soviet Union, they planned a huge railroad that would link the whole of Russia, China, and Europe. Maybe I think they even wanted to go down to Africa, but that's what they wanted to link, right? That's one of the Soviet Union's big ambition, big projects. And Brest, that was where the end of it came. So that's like where all the Russian trains can go. They can send loads of stuff into this area here, Brest, by train. So lots of men can get deployed to Brest. Now, if you consider you will have towns and little settlements along this line here. So rather than say, right, we're going to have a conventional attack, we're going to send artillery, we're going to, what they will say is, right, listen, Gopniks or Chuvaks, right? What I want you to do, I want you to move into Poland, and I want you to just take whatever you want. Literally, we're not going to pay you. Just take whatever you want. So whether that's factories, you know, these sanctions that the West have put on Russia, where they've taken frozen Russian assets and they're using them now to fund the war in Ukraine. They will just say, look, these guys have taken your stuff, go take it back. So now you've got this new dynamic of land pirates, basically, with AK-74s, ammunition, storming into towns, storming into cities, and just stealing things. And what the Russians will say is, whatever you take is yours, but the land belongs to Russia. And that's a very attractive offer. Like, can you imagine now if you're in Russia? Imagine you're very poor in Russia, right? And somebody says to you, do you want to go and steal a couple of houses in Europe? You'd say, yeah, I'll do that. So that's what I think is coming. And like these are things that nobody's even considering yet, land pirates. The reason I'm saying that is because I understand the culture. I understand how bad things are going to get. And it's a very effective way of doing things, right? The final tick in the box for me was when I saw, and people were laughing about it, and there's no reason to laugh about it because it's actually a really good tactic. When there was the Russians driving through, Pokrovs, and they were in civilian vehicles, and they were on motorbikes, and they were wearing civilian clothes. Like, that's a good tactic. And people are laughing, saying, oh, look, the Russians have run out of tanks. They're having to use civilian vehicles. Let me let everyone into a little secret, guys. There are plenty of civilian vehicles in Europe, right? If you can use your enemy's kit and equipment against them, that's a good thing. Do you know why? Because you're not using your own. The Russians are not running out of tanks, guys. The Russians can produce 150 tanks every month. What happens when you, and I know this, guys, from experience, right? If you have a Land Rover, right? If British military, right? If you have a Land Rover, which most, if you've been in the military, you definitely drove a Land Rover. If you have a Land Rover and something goes wrong on it, right? You have to call, and if you can't fix it yourself, obviously, you try and fix it yourself. And if you can't, you have to call an engineer. If that engineer needs a part, that part has to come from Land Rover. So guess what? Where are all these parts coming from? So I've been in situations where we can't get parts. So we just have to blow up a vehicle. All right, we can't get, gearbox or is it the oil sump? The oil sump or something? Right, we can't get one of these. The vehicle's unserviceable. We need to blow it up. So then you have to blow the vehicle up, and then you're a vehicle down. Guess what? If you're using civilian vehicles and your vehicle goes down, you just steal another one and you continue the mission. So that's where I think the future of this war is going to be in Ukraine. I think there's going to be, it might come from Brest. It could come from anywhere, basically. I just did that as an example, but you're going to have that scenario where you've got land pirates pushing into Europe, and they'll be told, right, whatever houses, cars, factories, whatever you take, that's yours, but the land you've occupied, that's part of Russia now. That's what they're going to say, something like that. And then can you imagine the enthusiasm from the Russian side? Can you imagine how they're going to be pushing forwards? Brad is saying pastures called nations adrenochrome herds. Right. I don't know what that means, guys. I don't know what that means. Sean, you sound a lot better today. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to you. Yeah, guys, I've been absolutely on my back foot. I have. I was really sick the other day. That's why I didn't do as many videos the other day. James is saying, I don't know how the poor Ukrainians have lasted so long. This war should have never happened. It shouldn't, no, but it was always going to happen. It was always going to happen. Linda Lou is saying, only Linda. Oh, no, KK. Sorry. Okay. Listen, I don't think any politician care about. When you're a politician, right? If you become a politician, your number one role is to keep your job. That's it, and everything else comes from that. Your number one role isn't to do the best thing for your people. Your number one role is to stay in power, and that's the problem with the system we've got. That's the problem with that is literally the problem. Lewis is saying conscripts kept at the front line on average 5 to 30 kilometers behind professional units, encouraging the push west. Yeah. So this is how the Russians are using conscripts at the moment. They have like maybe like Lewis is saying, maybe a buffer zone, right? Maybe 5 kilometers, at least 5 kilometers. So the whole of the front line in Ukraine, there's a 5 kilometer buffer zone. Now that buffer zone is not there to, they're not there to conduct offensive operations. They're literally there to slow down anyone that comes. They're not there to, stop them. They're literally there just to slow people down as they're advancing. And then the professional units that are set back, they then surge forwards. Paul J is saying, Falklands, the Paras fought against conscripts. Yes, they absolutely did. However, they were on an island. Okay. Yeah. A perfect example, actually. Perfect example. This is a perfect example. So yes, in the Falklands, the British Airborne Forces fought against fully armed, fully trained, fully led, and fully fed conscripts. Now, that was how a trained army will walk through a conscript army, right? Right? Now, the Falkland Islands is an island, right? So there were no more reinforcements getting on. There was no way for the Argentinians to keep pushing manpower on because they're on an island, right? So now consider the same scenario, right? With the attrition rate of the parachute regiment. But if those conscripts just kept coming, if the conscripts just kept coming, initially, you get the win, right? But then as your manpower starts to wane, which it will, because you will take casualties, then the conscripts start to push you back. And this is what you'll find. You will find that scenario where the initial month, a NATO-led war minus the United States in Ukraine against the Russians, right? The initial months you would be seeing headlines like NATO armor, no match for cheap Russian mass-produced tanks. NATO soldiers push forwards through defeat Russian conscripts outnumbered. They're outnumbered 3-1. You're going to see all these headlines, right? For the first month. But NATO will take casualties. And you can't replenish those casualties quick enough because it takes too long to replenish them. It takes too long. Literally takes too long. And we don't have the numbers. It's a numbers game. Like I say, this is gonna, like, the war in Ukraine is going to be a war. It's going to be a war, an industrial war, and the Russians have industrialized manpower, right? They can industrialize manpower, right? Listen, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump back on track because we're going down like some side quests here, which is absolutely fine. Right, Bradovis, right? Count Bradovis. Just behave, Bradavis, right? Just behave, right? So Restore Britain has been launched today. Rupert Lowe's new party. Now, it does seem like a breath of fresh air. It does seem like they're going in a good direction. I don't know how successful they'll be. I hope they're going to be very successful. And the United States are moving into strike positions around Iran. And what do I mean by that? They are moving the US excuse me. They are moving the world's largest aircraft carrier straight into the eye of the storm. They're moving the USS Gerald R. Ford, which is I didn't realize this. I thought all the US excuse me. I thought all the US aircraft carriers were they were built in batches, but apparently not. So the USS Gerald R. Ford is the biggest warship humanity has ever built. Can you imagine if rather than building all these, just as a little side quest, can you imagine if instead of building all these warships, we were building spaceships? Can you imagine how much cooler that would be? The biggest spacecraft the world has ever produced. But no. Anyway. So this is a floating city of steel and fire, capable of launching more than 75 aircraft. They're leaving the calm waters of the Caribbean right now, and in the coming days, they will be across the Atlantic once more, through the Strait of Gibraltar and into the Persian Gulf. She'll link up with the USS Abraham Lincoln strike group that's already on station. You guys can see the writing on the wall, can't you? You know, these aircraft carriers don't just bring aircraft. They bring Tomahawk missiles. They bring a whole host of, stuff with them. The two super carriers, two full strike groups, destroyers bursting with missiles, fighter jets screaming overhead, surveillance planes, drones, Tomahawks, submarines, special forces, strike capability. This isn't a routine rotation. This is deliberate and unmistakable. President Donald Trump has made it quite clear earlier this week. He warned Iran, we got to make a deal. Otherwise, it's going to be very traumatic, very traumatic. And he said that to reporters. There are some sort of negotiations going on. I think it's all pomp and pageantry. I don't think either side want to come to a deal. I don't think either side can come to a deal. The United States have already said, excuse me. The United States have already said back in November 2023 that they would not accept a nuclear-armed Iran under no circumstances, and they would take all action necessary to prevent it. The Iranians have said, we will develop nuclear weapons. We're going to do that. Remember, the Iranians have got... there are nuclear sites in Iran that are run by the Russians. I don't know how those things are working out. I don't know whether they're going to be strike options. I don't know whether the Russians are leaving. But you've got to understand, right? You've got to understand it when the Iranians or the Russians have these meetings, and they say and he's meeting with the I don't know, when Sergei Lavrov is meeting with the supreme leader or whatever, right? And they're having these conversations behind closed doors, and they say, right, and the supreme leader is like, listen, mate, we kind of need a nuclear weapon. And the Russians say, oh, right, well, do you want to buy one of us? We've got loads. Do you think the Iranians say, do you know what? I'd love to buy one off you, but we can't because the United States have sanctioned us? Or do you think they just say, yeah, we'll do that? Which one of those two options? Remember, everybody talks about nuclear weapons. There's several components of nuclear weapons that are very hard to get right. Having a nuclear weapon is one thing, right? Having a nuclear mushroom kaboomer is one thing. Having the ability to then put that in a weapon and deploy that at range, that's another thing in itself, right? because if they do buy one off the Russians, and I'm not saying they are, I'm saying that do you know what I am saying? It's more than there's a very strong likelihood that they've had that conversation, right? If they buy one off the Russians, then the Russian nuclear weapons will be built to go in Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they'll have all the cowling, they'll have all the fixing points on the inside of the missiles. You might think these things are easy to do, and they might be, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And without testing, trial and error, you can have a big mistake on your hands. So that's what's happening in the Middle East. Right, let me let's play some more of this video. Let's go some more of this video, guys. Hang on. Oh, hang on a minute. Lisa Jane is saying, news 1 minute ago, Starmer deploying a strike carrier group to the Arctic. So anything in the Arctic, guys, that's to counter the Russians. So breaking news, as Lisa's saying. Thank you, Lisa. Breaking news, as Lisa's saying. Starmer announces deployment of carrier strike group to the Arctic. Keir Starmer announces that the UK is sending a carrier strike group to the North Atlantic and to the high north this year. The US, Canada, and other NATO allies will play a role in the operation. This is all to do with the that northern region, because like you look on a map and you think, oh, hang on a minute. Sean, please read Donna's and my post. Right, have I just read? I think I've just read your post, Lisa. Sorry, guys, the chat's going crackers, and sometimes I just don't get to see them. Right, I'm going. Where is it? Where is it? Right, I'm going up. I'm going up. Right, where is it? Where is your right, guys? Donna, your comment was miles up. I'm trying to right, okay, right. This right. Is this it? Right. Okay, so Donna's saying the UK will deploy strike carrier group to the we spoke about that. And two, it comes as growing security over fears over Russia and China in the region, with Donald Trump alarming world leaders with threats to take over Greenland. So first of all, I think the United States should have Greenland. Like, it makes no sense. Like, Greenland is North America, right? It's not part of Europe. Greenland is North American. There's no denying that. As we move forward through time and the weather gets warmer, global warming's real, guys. Global warming's real. I'm not convinced it's man-made, but the Earth is getting warmer. That's the truth. That is the absolute truth. We are, the Earth is getting warmer. So all this Arctic ice, it starts to melt, and you're opening up shipping lanes. You're opening up resource exploitation. You're opening up mining. You're opening up drilling. So that whole northern region is becoming an area of renewed interest. Right, let me jump to. Listen, guys. Sometimes the chat goes up and I'm talking and I just totally miss it. The Watchman is saying we sold our carriers last week, replaced them with ships and canoes. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we did. Listen, the what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe we should just get rid. Maybe we should stop buying aircraft carriers and just buy rubber dinghies, because they seem to be unstoppable, right? Shez is saying King Rupert. King Rupert. Just type your comment again. He can't search for. Right, where am I missing comments, guys? Right, whose comments have I missed? Whose comments have I? Oh God! Right, guys. When I'm talking, like the comments jump up, and then I try to go up. I don't know whose comments I'm missing. Heard the news about Starmer talking about needing to step up. I don't know what Starmer's going to step up to. I think he needs to worry about his. I think Starmer needs to worry about his rent boys thing. Michael is saying cold winter exercises happen every year, usually in March. Listen, I'm not a naval guy. I don't know. What I do know is that whole Arctic region, as the Earth gets warmer, there's not as much ice, and because there's not as much ice, it makes it more accessible for shipping. It makes it more accessible for mineral exploration. And Band again, he's saying it's pole shift. It will spin in one day. Have you seen the Russian exercise? Not the Russian exercise. Have you seen the Russian experiment? So back in like the 70s, or I don't even know when it was. It might be the 80s. I don't know. There was a Russian, and he was in space, and he had a wing nut. You know how you get wing nuts off, right? You just spin them, don't you? You spin them with your finger and they come off. So he spun the wing nut off, right? Now, if you're in space, you would expect that wing nut just to keep spinning, right? You know, just to keep spinning and, you know, until friction brought it, you know, until, you know, air friction brought it to a halt. So what happened is they were spinning this wing nut, and it was coming off. And then what they found is, so now what you've got is you've got something spinning, right? You would assume you'd have a north and a south pole of something that's spinning, right? So what they found is when you spin something in space, every now and then it just randomly flips, and you don't know why it randomly flips. But you guys can go and see that video. So if you spin, let me try and find this video because it's worth watching. If we're talking about pole shifts and stuff. Right, I've spelled this wrong. That's not it. Right, I can't find it. The video is out there of this like this guy spinning a wing nut, and the oh, is that it? No. And then this it? Hang on, I think this is it. No. Right, I can't find it. I'm not going to get. I'm just conscious of the time, and I don't want to like waste time looking for a video that I've explained already. So there's a video, right? And if you're in space, you spin it, and it just shifts. So like, imagine a wing nut spinning, right? Imagine you're unscrewing a wing nut. It keeps going like that, right? So it's spinning, right, like a planet. And then what happens is, and this is well documented. I don't think anybody can explain why it happens. The wing nut will just all of a sudden it will just spin on its axis and continue spinning. So now north will be south and south will be north relative to the spaceship or whatever. So I think there's a lot of evidence about a pole shift. Oh, hang on a minute, Lisa Jane is saying, Sean, Starmer warns Europe must be ready to fight. Oh, this needs to be another live stream, doesn't it? Right. So let me share this. So I think this is another live stream, guys. I think this is a standalone live stream, this. Starmer warns Europe must be ready to fight as Russia threat grows. Europe must be ready to fight as it faces a growing threat from Russia. Prime Minister Keir Starmer told the Munich Security Conference the UK will also be tying strike carrier groups to the... Look, the problem here is they don't know what's coming. They think that this war is going to be fought conventionally. They think that this war is going to be fought with... It's not going to be fought conventionally, guys. They're going to use land pirates. Nobody else is talking about land pirates, right? I'm literally the only person on the whole of the internet who's talking about land pirates, right? But you know what it happens? People, they might not call it land pirates. They might call it something else. But that's what's coming, guys. You're going to have young Gopnik Russians, maybe even Belarusians, surging into Europe, and they are going to be, and they are just going to be stealing things, right? And it's going to be virtually impossible. It's going to be virtually impossible to deal with that, guys. It really is. It's going to be virtually impossible to deal with that. Lewis Ackers is saying Starmer is another puppet on a string, payroll and agenda pushers. Right, listen, guys, I think I'm going to close this down and come straight back on and do another one, because this Munich Security Conference, it's brought out a lot with the war in Ukraine. And here in the United Kingdom, ultimately, we are going to be dragged into this, right? We're not ready. We're not ready. So I'm gonna close this down now. I'm going to close this down now, and I'm going to jump back on, and I'm going to do another live stream, and I'm going to probably only going to be a short one, maybe half an hour or something, but I'm going to cover this in depth. So the crux of this live stream has been Rupert Lowe has launched his new party, Restore Britain, and I think it's a refreshing change. It was so refreshing when Rupert Lowe came into gave his speech, and he said, it's going to be painful, because to make things better, it's going to be painful. It's going to be hard work. It's going to be difficult. And this all happens as the United States are moving another strike carrier group into the Middle East. The USS Gerald R. Ford, which is the biggest ship that the world's ever, that anyone's ever produced. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to close this down now. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm going to literally go and get another coffee, and then I'll come straight back out, and we'll talk about what's happening in Europe, and with Starmer's warnings. Europe needs to be prepared to fight.